record to the cloud. Okay, we are recording. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kimberly Poe. I am the Children and Young Adult Library Consultant with the Connecticut State Library. Thank you for joining us this morning for part 2 of our workshop on bilingual story times and working with multilingual communities. I am going to turn this session over to our lovely presenter, Katie Scher, as she walks us through the second part of this work and this training that she has built. Katie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim. Thank you, everybody, for making the time to be here and to learn more about this topic of how to be inclusive of families and our communities, and really, you know, families in our world who you know, come from cultures outside of the dominant culture here in the United States and speak languages other than English at home. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's get that all pulled up. And get my presentation up here ready for you guys. We'll get the captions on here as well. Okay. Great. Let me move this. Okay. Sorry, guys. Just getting it all set up here. There we go. All right. There's always a couple of things when you're making that transition for screen sharing. Okay. So we are continuing to talk about the inclusion of families who speak languages other than English, people from other cultures, immigrant communities in our work as youth services folks, and specifically today talking about bilingual story time. I really feel that an obligation to acknowledge the moment that we're in right now, right off the bat, because we're talking about being inclusive of communities that fall outside of the dominant culture, and that's really white culture in the United States. And you know, the disparity is very palpable in our world right now. I'm in Kentucky, and so I know I'm feeling it in the way that I can feel it right now, and it just feels like it would be disingenuous to start this session that is so focused on inclusion without acknowledging that this can be painful for some folks. And I just really want to invite everyone to be with yourself however you are today, be with whatever comes up for you today. And this session overall should be really fun and get you really, really excited about awesome books and songs and just new ideas for story time. But it might not feel that way for everybody. And so I'm also, you know, you guys, I talked to you a little bit about who I am last time. And so I'm a mindfulness coach and a registered yoga teacher, and that work comes into my library work as well. And so I'm going to start us off with just a really brief mindfulness practice to come from wherever we're coming from and just land and before we start this session. So you're welcome to join me in this if you would like. Um, so to practice, we'll begin just by finding a comfortable seat. And if you're in a chair, I recommend just scooting forward from the backrest so that your spine can be free, nice and tall. Legs uncrossed, feet on the floor. Do whatever feels comfortable with your arms and hands. Eyes can be closed or open, whatever is your preference, where you feel safe and feel comfortable. I'm going to close mine and just talk us through a really short practice. So when we practice mindfulness, we're not doing anything fancy. We're just noticing what is as it is in the moment and paying attention to one thing at a time. For this practice, we'll pay attention to the feeling of the breath in the body, that sacred breath. So wherever it is that you feel your body breathing, maybe the nostrils or the belly, the chest, doesn't matter. Just invite your awareness to notice the physical sensation of each inhale and each exhale. And as you breathe in this way, you'll notice rather quickly thoughts, feelings, sensations, worries, memories, whatever, just all kinds of things coming up and taking your awareness away from really being present with the breath. And that's normal. That's just the human brain doing what human brains do. So each time that you notice that you're being pulled away, you're just getting information about where you are right now. And you're invited to notice that and very, very gently guide your awareness back to simply feeling the body breathe. And we'll just breathe quietly on our own for a few more moments, and I'll ring a bell to close us out. As you hear the sound of the bell start to fade, if the eyes have been closed, I invite you to softly blink them open. And welcome. Welcome to our session on bilingual story time and the use of languages other than English in our storytime programs. So since this is a session about story time, I am going to start us off with a song. This is a bilingual version of a song that I heard one of my colleagues use in story time very often to welcome kids and families to the program. And so I'm just gonna teach it to you guys, and you can sing it along with me if you want to. So this is a song where we would go around the group and ask everyone, ¿Cómo te llamas? What's your name? And so I'll just use the name um, Allie, and and we can clap the syllables for each name too. So bienvenidos, welcome everybody. We're gonna start with our opening song to learn each other's names. So, friend, ¿cómo te llamas? What's your name? Her name is Allie. So Allie has 2 syllables. Let's clap those out. Allie. And we'll sing our song. Se llama Ali, Ali, Ali. Their name is Ali. ¿Cómo te llamas? What's your name? And then you could go around the circle or however you have your structure and welcome everybody to the group with a song like that. And you could certainly take a very simple idea like this and modify it for other languages if you can make the rhythm fit as well. I also want to acknowledge the beautiful woman in this photograph here. This is a picture of Porta Belpré. So she was a librarian for the New York Public Library, I believe in the early 1900s. And she was one of the first librarians to be doing bilingual story time, specifically reaching out to the Puerto Rican community and doing programming in English and Spanish and bringing in folk tales from Puerto Rican culture. And so this work is not new. It's been happening for a very long time, and you know, everything that I know about bilingual story time certainly you know, stands. It's not only from my own experience, but it's from the work of and the legacy of people like Porta Belpré and Aurelia Garza de Cortes, who was the founder of the Porta Belpré Book Award and really had to fight to make that happen. Jamie Campbell Naidu, who has written many books on diverse children's literature and so many others. So I just really want to acknowledge that legacy. I need to fix something here that's going on with my screen so that I can see what I need to see. My apologies, guys. I don't know exactly what happened here. Let me see if I can get this to come back up the way I want it to. Hold on for just a second. Okay, now I'm going to do a screen share again. Pull this back up. Okay, there we go. All right, so I already talked to you guys about me in the last session. So, you know, basically, the important things to know are, you know, that I did bilingual story time in public libraries for many years in different systems. And my experience is really in bilingual story time in English and Spanish and in serving Latinx and Spanish speaking first generation immigrant communities. That's really where I was immersed. But we are going to be talking in a way that is very general. So the first example that I showed you is in English and Spanish, but there will be content today that shows you examples and in that are inclusive of lots of other languages and cultures as well. And a lot of what we will be discussing can be adapted, right? Like or would apply, I guess is a better way to say it. It's not just bilingual story time in English and Spanish. This could be ways to approach bilingual story time in English and Arabic, English and Mandarin, English and Thai, whatever it is that's in your community, or whatever uh, language it is that you are wanting to embrace and incorporate in your bilingual storytime program. So if folks have comments, suggestions, ideas from their own experience delivering bilingual storytime programs, do feel free to chime those in the chat, and we will have some discussion opportunities as well. So just wanted to kind of note what the group looks like in terms of language skill based on what you all told me in the survey. So most of you are planning to use Spanish or Spanish and another language in your bilingual storytime program. It's a pretty significant number, 87%. So there's definitely going to be material that will be useful for that structure. A good chunk of you speak a language other than English, at least to some degree, a little over half. And in the group, folks speak most folks who speak another language speak Spanish, but we also have French, Urdu, Hindi, Mandarin, Portuguese, and ASL all represented in this group as well. So about 20% feel really comfortable using a language other than English, and about 20% said that they don't speak another language at all. And wherever it is that you fall in this, there is something for you today. Absolutely something for you today. So we're going to talk a little bit about why we want to be inclusive of other languages in story time, some frameworks, like what would that actually look like? How would I do it? How do I know what materials to use? How do I evaluate for cultural authenticity? I have a couple great resources that I'm going to show you guys, and we are going to have some sample story times as well. And I want to say that this pulling together the sample story times was really, really fun for me because I challenged myself to make sure that they weren't only English and Spanish bilingual story time examples. So one will be English and Mandarin, and one will be English and Arabic. And that was just really fun and cool challenge to put myself in the position of looking for the resources and building a program in languages that I don't speak, and being authentically representative of cultures with which I don't have personal direct familiarity or experience. So it was kind of me putting myself in some of your shoes, and thank you for that opportunity because it was cool. It was fun, and I look forward to sharing those with you guys. And there will be tons and tons and tons of book trailers and songs throughout as well, so that you'll get tastes of the awesome stuff that's out there to use, and hopefully it will feel you'll feel so energized, like I can't wait to use these things. So that's where we are going. I also before we move into the next bit, though, I want to pull up our Flipgrid. Yeah, so here's our diverse book talk speed date Flipgrid. And it was so cool to see all the things that you guys shared. I hope that I watched all of them, and I hope that uh, if you haven't had a chance to visit and take a look, please do. And this is your page. This is your gallery. So if you haven't, had the opportunity to add something yet, so do it tomorrow, do it next week, do it when you can, because what a resource this will be for you all to see what your fellow colleagues are excited about, even after this session is over. And there were, I was familiar with a lot of the books, but there were definitely at least 2 new ones up there for me. And one of them I will be mentioning in a little bit, because I just thought it was really, really great. So thank you for sharing new books with me too. I love it. All right, so let me pull this down so I can get us back to where we need to be. Sorry, y'all. This, yeah, so Zoom does this thing where it puts itself right where my links are that I need. And I'm trying to minimize my screen here. Oh man, it is not letting me do it. So sorry. All right, I'm just gonna have to stop this share again for a second. And then we'll start it back up. And I'm gonna make this small before I even do that. Okay. All right, back on we go. Captions back on. All right. So here is our first book trailer. This is a book called Thread of Love. So enjoy.
Are you sleeping, Brother G? Brother G? Morning bells are ringing, morning bells are ringing, ding, ding, dong, ding, ding, dong. While you're dreaming, I will start, making you a rocky thread of love, thread of love. Chop, cut, cut, chop, chop, carefully, carefully. Weave the threads together, weave the threads together. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Sparkle, glitter, sequins glow, sequins glow. Don't forget the tassel, don't forget the tassel. Swish, 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 swish. Here's your Rocky, here's your Rocky. I will tie, I will tie. Hope you keep it always, hope you keep it always. Thread of love, thread of love. Brothers, sisters, cousins too, cousins too. Family, friends, and neighbors, family, friends, and neighbors. Thread of love, thread of love.
Love that. So cool. And I've read the book before, but the book trailer itself gave me. I mean, there's so many ideas of cool programming things that you could do with something as a tie-in with that book. So obviously, um, uh, talking about uh, the um, the material and making the your own thread of love, to share with somebody, but even tying in something like um, Frida by Yuyi Morales, or Viva Frida by Yuyi Morales, and the puppetry that's in that book, I mean, you could even talk about that and bring in puppetry and that kind of art, while using these diverse materials that are, inclusive of other cultures and other languages as well. So, um, so why include, um, you know, other languages in story time? Why do we want to do that? And why would we want to make sure that the the in our story time, even if it's mostly an English language story time, that it's inclusive of other cultures? I think probably most people, if you are spending your time to be here today, you probably already know or have a gut instinct about why that's a beneficial thing to do. Even if you have a pretty homogenous community, it's still a beneficial thing to do. But sometimes, you know, uh, you have to make the case for others, or um, allow your work to inspire others to get on board as well. So some of this is even if you already know it, it can be a chance to just get some more language and resources in your pocket for how to talk about why you're doing what you're doing with others. So let's hear right off the bat from Rudine Sims Bishop, who is a children's literature scholar from Ohio State University, and we're going to talk in a second about this idea of windows and mirrors. And in our last session, we ended with this video from Grace Lynn, acknowledging windows and mirrors, and that terminology of windows and mirrors, specifically in the context of children's literature, that it comes from Rudine Sims Bishop. So let's hear what she has to say.
Diversity in children's books is going to flourish when we are able to have it just accepted as a normal part of schooling and librarianing, if there's such a word. So one of the things that I would hope people do is to really integrate diverse literature into whatever it is they're doing. So when you want to read aloud, find a book by an African American, find a book by a Latino, read Pat Morra, read Walter Dean Myers, read out loud. and read those books. When people are doing their little research projects, I often look at the bibliography. You know, there's this study of we use these books to do X. So I look at the end to see the bibliography, what were the books that they used. And so often there are no books that from underrepresented groups that are a part of that project. And I think that's something. I think you have to also demand, if you will. People, publishers, marketers will respond to demand. So if parents go into Barnes & Noble and say, I want to see books about X, Y, and Z, or I want to see these specific books, I think they'll begin to show up. With the book clubs, I think they can certainly be encouraged to include more diversity in the selections that they offer the children. But basically, it's that business of being diligent about making sure that classroom libraries are diverse and that those books are not just pulled out during February or during whatever month we celebrate American Indians, say October, but that it's a part of all year round, any time. It's just a natural part of what happens in the classroom.
So that word diligent really stood out to me in listening to this video again, because that really, the other word that comes to mind for me is accountability too, you know, holding ourselves accountable to assessing, you know, what materials are we using and who can see themselves and who can see um, others. How are others seen in our programming? You know, so this is an an effort in intentionality um, that does not ask us to give anything up by perhaps taking some of our tried and true favorites from white authors and letting them take a little rest so that we can have more space at the table for you know, for other voices to be included. Um, because once we do that, um, we'll find new favorites, you know, new authors and illustrators and musicians that we are obsessed with and we'll have to be diligent about putting them back on the shelf and and keep challenging ourselves to find more. But you know, what a wonderful problem for people who love books and care about children, right? That's a great problem. Um, so windows and mirrors, you know, this idea, really embracing that in story time all year round, as Ms. Bishop said, that's the idea that of providing material that allows kids to see their life experience reflected. So seeing people that look like them, seeing people who eat, you know, who speak like them, whose family structure looks like theirs, you know, whose neighborhood looks like theirs. So providing books where kids can see themselves in a positive way, but also and that's mirrors. If I said windows, apologies, but that's mirrors, that reflecting back, right, of one's own life experience, because otherwise, you know, if a child of color or an immigrant child doesn't see themselves, you know, if they're invisible, what message does that send? Right, that sends a message of not mattering, and it's not necessarily purposeful, um, but we have such an opportunity when we work with young children, to make sure that for the kids that we're serving, that that's not happening, right? And that they are seeing themselves and they are knowing that they matter and they're not invisible. And then windows are also so important because kids start to develop, um, biases and preferences based on what they soak up in the culture around them, around race, and culture and whatnot, very young. Very young. I think there's research from the Anti-Defamation League that, it's by 3. Kids are already, developing these racial preferences, especially, white kids who are not exposed to other, cultures or races, in a positive ways in public spaces. So the window aspect of this is also so important, because it can, that's how we show our shared humanity, right? Um, so windows and mirrors, that's something that's definitely a way to talk about why we're doing what we're doing with this kind of inclusion in story time. This graphic folks may have seen before. It's based on, it's a graphic representation of who's included in children's books. So what do the mirrors look like, based on who is, who are the protagonists in children's literature, and, who are the authors and illustrators being published. And this comes from the statistics that are collected by, the Cooperative Children's Book Center, every year. And this is based on 2018 data. So you can see, for this white boy, he has so many mirrors. And that's great. He can see himself in real life context. He can imagine himself as being anything because he sees himself everywhere. And that's so great for him and his, development of identity and sense of self. However, the next largest group that would see themselves represented, that would have a mirror, aren't even people. It's animals and like trucks and dinosaurs and, all these, non-human protagonists. And then as we move down and start to look at the numbers of, of kids who are included from racial and ethnic minority groups, not only are the numbers smaller and smaller and smaller in ways that are disproportionate to their actual population size, you can see the quality of the mirrors is not very good either. Some are cracked, some are tiny, so not only are there less books about these kids where they have a chance to see themselves, but there's also, less quality in what they see. But the great thing is that when we have so much power in our interactions with children and as librarians and in story time or in schools, in the classroom, because we have the opportunity to make sure with just that diligence, that intentionality, that holding ourselves accountable, that really great windows and mirrors are available, for everybody. And if we have a responsibility, I think, to do that too, because, one, it can feel sometimes like, oh my gosh, the world is so overwhelming. You know, what can I even do? We can do this, and this matters. It does. Making sure that kids see themselves and see other people as fully human matters. Um, and it's you know, it's something that can not only be educational, um, but really healing for families and for kids as well. Um, I want to also mention that this kind of cultural inclusion in our work with kids, we talk a lot in library land about early literacy, right? Getting those doing those 5 practices and building those 6 skills so that kids are ready to read when they get to school. But there's other skills that are equally important in terms of school readiness, and we're just kind of starting to talk about this in libraries, but this is a big part of what I do in Story, Songs, and Stretches, which is my other kind of flagship program of using movement and mindfulness intentionally in story time. Um, so this inclusion of diverse literature is also going to support the development of social emotional skills, specifically social awareness, relationship skills, and self-awareness too. So again, just another way to talk about why we're doing what we're doing when we are being inclusive of these materials. And on that, I want to show you guys another book. I know that the videos also can be choppy on Zoom, so don't worry too much. If you can't see everything, you know, exactly perfect, links to all of the videos that I'm using today are on the resources handout that you already um, have. So you can certainly go and find those and look at them again with a little, you know, little less choppiness on your own, and share them perhaps with your colleagues so they'll get jazzed about using these books too. And I absolutely believe and trust that you all want the families that you serve to know that they matter, and to know that um, their neighbors matter, and other kids that they haven't even met yet matter. And that's why you're here doing this work. And um, you do have so much power. Um, these small things, they add up. Um, so this is one way. This is one way that we can make a difference in our communities, and you know, that builds, right? That builds over time. So, talking specifically about bilingual story time, One of the questions that comes up a lot is who can do it? Like, are my language skills good enough to do this? How would I do that? So I'm going to present with you all, or to you all, several different frameworks and talk about who is best suited for each. So the first framework would require one to actually be bilingual. And so that is a bilingual story time that is done with one presenter, or a monolingual story time in a language other than English. And we'll talk about the benefits of each of those and making sort of the choice on which is the best route here in a bit. But it's to me, it's really important, and I put this in Once Upon a Cuento when Jamie and I were working on it together, that if a program is called, bilingual story time, then it the person who is presenting that program needs to be able to communicate with the families who come in the language that they prefer to use. Um, because if we're calling something bilingual story time, but we aren't actually, it's sort of like we've memorized a rhyme, or we're, using a few words here and there and calling it bilingual story time. And then a family comes and, speak Spanish, and they want to talk to you about, the library or whatever, and you're not able to help them, then who is that really serving, Um, so I really think that, if we're going to do a bilingual story time with one person, then the language skills need to be there. Now, there's always the question on how much, right? So I am not a native Spanish speaker. I learned it as a second language when I was in my late teens and early 20s, and wound up continuing to use it on pretty much every job that I had after college. And when the time came, it was so accidental. Like, I did not set out to do bilingual story time. I didn't apply for a job that asked for Spanish language skills. The way that it happened was I um, did outreach about uh, the homework help center and that I was running, and the library itself, and elementary school. And there were a lot of Spanish speaking parents there, and there weren't many Spanish speaking staff at the school. It was an open house. And so I wound up translating essentially, but for the school and the families, just because I was there. And then people realized, like, that there was someone who spoke Spanish at the library, and they would come and um, ask me to help them with all kinds of different things. And so then that just became turning into doing bilingual story time down the line. And, I was really, really scared and really nervous about doing that, because I wondered that, I wondered, like, am I a fraud doing this? Are my language skills good enough? What if a family has questions and I can't answer them? Um, so that trepidation it was definitely part of my journey into doing this. Um, but I, I'm so grateful that I was kind of pushed to do it, because at that time, there weren't other staff who had been hired for the system that I worked with who had the language skill to do that. And once I just got out of my own head about needing to be perfect, and just started doing my best and connecting and relating with families, I found out that absolutely, absolutely, I had enough language skill that I was able um, to talk with them and learn about their kids and help them with any kind of library questions and just like chit chat and do these programs. And so I really feel like that degree of fluency is what you're looking for in deciding whether or not you have the language skills to do a fully bilingual program or to do a program in a language other than English. But that doesn't mean that if you don't have those skills that you can't do bilingual story time. So another way to approach bilingual story time is to work with a partner. So this is you like tandem programming, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in just a minute. But that is another way that you can have a fully bilingual program, call it bilingual story time. And because now you actually have people there who can communicate with families in either language. And that person can help you in so many other ways also, those partners, and we'll talk about that. The last framework is not having a bilingual story time, but making sure that your story time in general is intentionally inclusive of other cultures and other languages. And anyone can do this. And I think that everyone should be doing this. So those are sort of the three frameworks and the language skills that will be required for each. So some things to think about if you aren't bilingual yourself, but you want to do bilingual story time and want to work with a partner to do that. One of the first things is that this should really be a true partnership, because both folks who are, in this work together are bringing really important skills to the table, right? So the library staff person is bringing just an understanding of storytime fundamentals, right? How to read books to kids, kind of the arc of a story time, what makes a great book. And you've got the access to the materials from the library as well, where your partner is also bringing in important skills. There's the language skills, but ideally this person would either be from or have really close connections with the community that you're representing with this bilingual story time. And so they're going to be able to bring in this cultural knowledge and community connections as well. So, it's not so much about looking for somebody who can just translate your story time for you, right? It's more about having a real, true partnership with someone who can help you build this culturally authentic bilingual program. And that, yeah, it takes time. It takes time to find the right fit for that. So it may take a little while to get your rhythm and get your flow and kind of find who is going to be the right fit. But there are so many cool things that can happen once you do. um, I really encourage folks to look for partners from community agencies and groups and organizations that that will allow this, that have a similar mission, so that the person that you're working with can be doing it as part of their work and thereby be compensated, because what they are bringing to the table should be compensated. So rather than relying on volunteers. Now, that being said, if you have a really, active like volunteer group of folks who have the language skills and the cultural knowledge that you're looking to integrate into your story time. It's not that working with volunteers is bad, you know, but it's not it's not the right approach all the time. And you really just want to think carefully about making sure that what skills your partner is bringing to the table, how that's being valued, right? And if you have another agency that cares about school readiness and literacy and all similar things that the library does, where you can form this partnership and they can work with you as part of their job and be compensated, then there's that person's time is being valued. Always good to start with a pilot program if you're trying something new. That is such a great phrase to always have in your back pocket, right? Because that's going to give you a chance to see how, if the partnership is going to work, right? Because you just might not know until you kind of jump in and try it. And sometimes things can feel a little bit sticky at first when you're working with a partner, just because like maybe they don't have a lot of story time experience or whatever, or but those are things that you can work together and figure out, right? So a partnership, you might find out that it's not going to be viable if if you're putting things together and then they're not coming together, if there are other obligations that are keeping this from really gelling as a partnership. So kind of testing something out before it's always on the calendar kind of thing is always a good way to go. Pilot program. And yes, it can be a little tough to get it going, but the cool thing is that when you do connect with a partner, if any of you have ever done tandem programming before, even if it wasn't bilingual, when you have two people, you can do like really creative stuff, right? Like and you also have somebody that you can then be bouncing ideas off of. I know for me, the entire time that I was working in public libraries, I didn't have, uh, there's all this training and meetings and sharing of stuff that got people really inspired for English language story time. And that was great, but it would have been so nice to have a partner who was also doing programming in Spanish, where, we could have had that same idea exchange, because I think that idea exchange, it's refreshing, right? And it keeps us, it just keeps things from getting stale, and it's nice to talk through your ideas with someone else too. So yes, can be a little bit hard to get a partner. Super cool when you do, and you can do super creative and fun things when it's two people instead of just one. So a question that comes up a lot is, what's better? English language or all story time that's all in a language other than English, or story time that is bilingual, so English and another language. And I think that even the framing of that question is problematic, because it sets it up as though there's a debate or an argument, right? And really, each approach has value, and so it's really about just understanding what you want your program to do, and what skills and resources are available in your staff, and what your community most needs. So, some of the value, or the benefit of a monolingual story time, it's immersion, right, in the home language, in that, so it really models for families how important it is to interact with their kids, talk with their kids, do all those early literacy practices, right, in the language that they know best. Because we know from the research, right, that if you have a strong foundation in early literacy skills in your home language, then not only does that help with maintaining that language, but it also makes the transition to learning another language like English easier. But you can see how that could feel so counterintuitive to a parent who really, really wants their child to succeed, fit in, do well in school. And so that parent might feel a lot of pressure to expose them to English as much as possible, even if the only way that they can do that isn't in a really interactive way. And, a story time, I mean, and this happens in bilingual story time too, um, but story time immersion in that home language really communicates that value of talking with your child in the language you know best. Um, and what a big part of what we're doing with any story time, right, is modeling the practices that we hope continue to happen outside of the library. Um, if you're doing a program in one language as opposed to two languages, it gives you a little bit more flexibility in the length of the books and some of the other materials that you might use. There's a safety element as well, if because the program might just having a place that feels safe to connect with other families that share aspects of your culture and your heritage can be something that can really also be important for families too. And then just in terms of this, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but just like from the educational perspective, monolingual story time in a language other than English would support sequential bilingualism. So learning one language first and then learning another language. Bilingual story time, it's still modeling that value of home language, but some of the other benefits, it really is a celebration of bilingualism, right? Being bilingual is a great thing. How cool, and so that message of bilingualism as a positive, as an asset, may not show up in a lot of public spaces, just depending on what your community is like. And I know for me, at the last library that I worked at, that was very true, and was a big part of choosing to do a bilingual story time. That community where I still live, is pretty segregated as well. So another value of bilingual story time is that it brings together in a public space folks who maybe aren't going to the same schools and shopping at the same grocery stores and going to the same churches, you know, so that opportunity for interaction between folks whose lives may not otherwise intersect. And just on the education piece of this again, so a bilingual story time would be a way to support simultaneous bilingualism, so the learning of two languages at the same time. So one is not better than the other, right? Look at your skill set. I mean, if you aren't bilingual but you want to do bilingual story time, then, or do story time in another language, then you're probably going to have to do bilingual story time with a partner, right? If you are bilingual, maybe bilingual story time is the right choice. Maybe doing a program fully in Urdu or fully in Mandarin, is what's going to work best. So, and there's certainly room for experimentation as well, right? So that's where that pilot program idea or, term comes in as well, to give you a little bit of flexibility to play around and try and see what's gonna work for you. So let's meet another really great diverse book. I was excited to find that book trailer. I haven't had a chance to read that one yet, and I can't wait to get my hands on it. But that's I really like that example because it's intersectionality, right? It's right there. So the protagonist in this book, she faces some issues at school of feeling different, not only because she is Vietnamese, but also because she has two moms, and she's not just somebody who has two moms. She's not just somebody who is Vietnamese. Both of those things are parts of her identity, and finding strength in that. I through this story. So that's just a great example of a book that can be culturally inclusive, but also touch on other aspects of identity, because we aren't it's not only culture and language. There's so much diversity within any ethnic group, right? And so embracing the diversity within various ethnic books or ethnic groups with the books that we choose as well. And I thought that was a really great example of that. So when talking about bilingual story time, specifically, so I'm going to kind of move away from monolingual story time now. That's another way, but talking about bilingual story time and or implementing other languages in storytime if you are not bilingual yourself. How would I do that? How do I do that? What's that look like? So we're going to kind of get into some of those details. So there are a couple, so for this is about bilingual story time. We'll go on from here about inclusion of other languages in English language story time. But like truly bilingual story time. So we've got English and another language, and they are, they're being used equally in the program. Kind of two approaches for how people do that. And again, it's not that one is right and one is wrong. They just have different benefits. This isn't, do this one, don't do that one. It's here's how you might do both, choose which one is going to work for you. So the first is using both languages simultaneously. So that would be, I have a bilingual book, bilingual book in English and Spanish, and yo voy a leer este libro en español, and at the same time, I'm going to read this book in English, page by page by page. So, and then, using bilingual songs, or, maybe doing a song in Spanish and then a song in English, or whatever. Songs are a little bit different kind of than books, just because there isn't as much bilingual music. But if you have the language skills, there's so much that you can do with piggybacking on familiar rhymes to make bilingual songs. But if you're going to use both languages at the same time, it's really important. Probably the biggest thing is to make sure that you aren't picking books that are too long. So thankfully, I'm most familiar with bilingual books in English and Spanish, right? And so it used to be really, really hard to find bilingual books for story time, because so many of them were published, and they were like a paragraph of text in English and then a paragraph of text in Spanish on every page. And if you're reading in both languages, that it's just way, way, way too long. So it's way better now, though. There's so many great books out there, bilingual books to choose from. So I really recommend looking for about 2 to 3 lines of text per page in each language. So going with stuff that is short. You'll want to be careful with rhyme, especially if you're using anything that is translated, because sometimes rhyme, it, like, if how you have picture books where I read read the words on this page and then flip, and then the sentence on the next page rhymes with, so it kind of has that pattern. But sometimes the rhyme in the other language just might not match up exactly with where the rhyme is in the first language. So you just kind of want to watch for the page turns so that you're not breaking up rhyme or rhythm in either of the languages as you're reading the book. Definitely can experiment with how you use songs. I always preferred to use bilingual songs, so songs that were in English and Spanish, or Spanish language songs, or songs and rhymes that were traditional from Spanish-speaking cultures for myself. And then you'll just really want to make sure to be choosing bilingual books and books that are available in languages other than English, whenever possible, rather than translating on the fly. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But that would be kind of what it looks like if you're using both languages at the same time. So sometimes another way to do it is to use both languages, but to use them separately. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. So you might have the first half of the program be all in English, and then the second half of the program be all in your second language. You might have it be that you're doing a welcome song in English, welcome song in the other language, um, book in the other language, song in the other language, book in English, song in English, and then kind of wrapping up. Um, so this is a style that tends to be preferred in educational settings, where the emphasis is on working with dual language learners to like activate their background knowledge and then build on that to instruct more fluency in another language. Um, so it is another way to do it, and it definitely has value. I personally always preferred to do simultaneous language use, but that doesn't mean that like I'm right or that it's the only way to do it. I will say if you're going to use the two languages separately, um, that can be really great for families who are already bilingual. Like if families already speak both the languages um, that you're using, they're going to be able to follow everything. Um, but you might lose the attention of some of the kids or even some of the adults, if you're if they aren't already bilingual, and then you're say fully reading a book um, in a language that they don't speak. You just want to find ways to keep everybody engaged as you do that.
Hey, Katie.
Yeah,
We actually have a question in the chat that's kind of pertaining to what you're talking about.
great.
Tina wrote in the chat, in bilingual story times, do you also read books that have blended text? For example, Spanish words mixed in the same sentences with English.
You're leading me in, Tina. You're leading me up to where we're gonna go. You definitely can use those books in bilingual story time. That yes, you certainly can. Um, those books that you're talking about are really, really great for being inclusive of other cultures and other languages in an English language story time as well. So if you're doing bilingual story time, those books that are blended, they can be really great um, to bring in, but I wouldn't have that be the only kinds of books that I'm reading, because then I'm still reading mostly in English, with a few words in another language here and there. So the books that I'm reading in that case, it's, I'm not really doing fully bilingual reading if those are the only kinds of books that I'm using, or the majority of the kinds of books that I'm using. So I would look to actually be reading in both languages that are represented, whether you're doing it simultaneously or separately. But that doesn't mean don't ever use them. They are a great tool, especially the Own Voices books that are out there. And for some cultural groups and language groups, um, those are the ones that you're going to find more readily as well too. So the publishing has gotten a lot better with bilingual books in Spanish, but for other languages, it is trickier to find those. But we're headed right into that direction. So great question.
One more sort of follow up to that, and it might be something that you're planning to speak to later, so feel free to say, we'll get there later, let's save that for the end. But I have another question in here from S. Smith. So I'm sorry, S, I'm not entirely sure what your first name is, but they said if you were using those books, so the ones that Tina mentioned, oh, Sue, hi, Sue, the ones that Tina mentioned, or maybe even anything that you're talking about here, particularly on this slide when talking about how to integrate books from other languages into your story times or focus on books from other languages into your story times. But is there a place where you can hear the language spoken before you read it so you don't massacre the pronunciation if it's the language that you don't speak?
Yes, yes, you guys are thinking we're heading right there. Absolutely, yes. So here is the next slide. What if I don't speak a language other than English? What can I do in story time? So you either can do bilingual story time working with a partner, or you can, or, you know, if you want to do bilingual story time, you can work with a partner. In addition to that, here's what else you can do. So you can make sure that you are including those linguistically and culturally diverse books everywhere. So that's story time, but that's not just story time, right? That's our reading lists. That's our book displays. That's what we're recommending to teachers to use in the classroom, what we're book talking when we're visiting schools. So like right off the bat tomorrow, that could be a place to start, is just auditing how do we have culturally and linguistically diverse books included in the reading lists that we have on the website, or wherever. So that is one thing that we can certainly do. You can use those blended books that you are talking about in story time and turn to resources online to be able to hear the pronunciation of any words that you are unfamiliar with in advance. And that would be highly recommended, not because you have to be perfect, but because that's a demonstration of respect, right? So you're not presenting yourself as fluent in that other language, but you're also not, saying, yeah, okay, I'm using this other language, or, I'm incorporating this book that includes words from another language, but I care so little about it that I'm, not going to at least try to find the pronunciation. So a dictionary online that I really recommend is called Word Reference, wordreference.com. And I recommend that one because there's a little speaker button. And so you can hear words pronounced from that dictionary. There's also such a proliferation now on YouTube of read alouds. It was almost a little bit frustrating looking for book trailers, because there's so many less book trailers to find now, and just so many read alouds. But the great thing is that can be a really great tool, especially if you're hearing the author, or somebody from who is a native speaker or of the language being included, if you can hear them read it in advance of reading it yourself. You can bring linguistically diverse music into your story time too. So that can be trying out really simple rhymes and songs, especially those, not just a translation of head, shoulders, knees, and toes, but, if there is something that is simple that you can learn that's actually traditional to the community that you're representing, that's one way that you can do it. But don't feel all this pressure to like have it all memorized or be perfect. I'm going to show you more um, resources on this, but on your resource list, two really, really great uh, projects that are out there are Story Blocks from Colorado Libraries for Early Literacy and Embracing Diversity from the Burnaby Public Library in Canada. And they have videos of folks singing and sharing traditional rhymes and songs in a bunch of different languages. And you can even, you can bring digital media into your story time and even use those videos to kind of assist. You can also remember, like as people are coming into the program or as they're socializing, as story time is ending, that's a great time to have that diverse music playing in the background as well. So, um, books, yes, absolutely. But there are strategies for using materials beyond just books as well, even if you don't speak that language. Storytelling tools like flannel boards can be another technique for sharing stories that include words and from other languages with that are beyond books. So books are one way, and then don't forget that we also have these other tools that are available to us that are also places that we can integrate those other languages. And you might feel nervous doing this, or a little bit uncomfortable, and that is okay. That's we don't have to look at that as a problem, right? When you feel those nerves, you can look at that as an indicator of your desire to be inclusive and in a respectful way, and you can see that as a signal that, wow, I've been a librarian for 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, and here I am doing something new, and pushing myself out of my comfort zone and continuing to grow. Because my focus, it's not on me, and my work isn't to make sure that I'm as comfortable as I can be all the time. It's about, really doing the best that I can by the kids and by the families, not only to provide those mirrors where other cultural groups see themselves reflected, but also to provide windows so that kids in the dominant group can see other kinds of kids portrayed as, fully human and, worthy of respect and dignity too. So yeah, you might feel nervous, and that's okay. Kudos, good for you that you're pushing yourself out there, because you know that it's not about you, it's about them, and that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to show you a teeny tiny little portion of a bilingual song. This is, I didn't write, I can't believe I didn't write the name of this down. It'll pop up. But this is a song by Elena Moon Park. And I'll just play it for you and then we'll talk about it.
Skip, skip, skipping stone. Pong dum, toddle, twenty jazz. Skip, skip, skipping stone. Pong dum, toddle, twenty jazz. Split a rock and make a stone. Split a stone and make a waves ripple wide, turn away to run and hide. Skip, skip, skipping stone. 퐁당, 터를 던지자. Skip, skip, skipping stone. 퐁당, 터를 던지자. Skip, skip, skipping stone. 퐁당, 터를 던지자. Skip, skip, skipping stone. 퐁당, 터를 던지자.
So that song is in Korean and English, and Elena Moon Park has, I think, 2 records out where she sort of reworks traditional Asian children's songs, and they're not only Korean. She works with with musicians and singers. She's a musician, and then she works with vocalists, a lot of different vocalists, to kind of make these, reimagined versions of songs that are traditional. And she has songs from Japan, songs from Korea, songs from Thailand. So definitely she is someone to check out. But and they're not always bilingual. And the first part of this song isn't bilingual. It's in Korean at the beginning. But I just, when I hear that and hear the words, maybe I don't know how to sing the Korean, but there are, little bits of it that I could practice and be able to sing. And also, there's so many ways, because I'm always thinking about movement and mindfulness as well. So this just seems like, when I heard this song, I was like, oh, skip, skipping stones, throw a rock into the street. There's so many cool movement things that you could do with this song, so that you're moving along to it, and including something that is from another culture and from another language, even if you aren't able to sing along with it in that other language yourself. All right, so let's meet some more awesome books and songs, and talk about how do we pick the ones that we're going to use, and just any of the kinds of things to know when we're selecting the materials that we're going to use, whether it's in a bilingual story time, or a monolingual story time in another language, or English language story time that's being intentionally inclusive of other cultures and languages. So right off the bat, let's hear from Pat Mora. We listened to her speak in the last session as well. Very prolific children's author, and she's just going to talk a bit about using bilingual books.
Last year, I had an interesting experience. I was talking to teachers and librarians about using bilingual books. And in looking at the audience, I did not know how many of the people in the room were bilingual. That's always risky, because we can't judge by looking at someone and knowing whether they are bilingual or not. But I happened to ask the group, I said, I want you to be honest. I don't want you to be worried about saying the right thing. How do you feel about bilingual books? And I was so grateful to the person who raised her hand and said, they intimidate me. And I said to her, I really applaud you for your honesty. Why do they intimidate you? And she said, because I'm the person in charge. I should have the answers. I'm looking at a book where I can't pronounce half the words in the book. Now that is such a key issue, because we know that those of us who believe that bilingual books are important, and for a minute I'm going to focus on English-Spanish. We know these books are important because we know the size of this population and it is growing. We also know that the teaching and the library population does not reflect the diversity of our students. If they are not ordering these books and are not using those books will not be published. And I think that this is a very complex challenge that I don't hear discussed at teacher and librarian conferences. How does someone who really wants to work with their students, but who is not bilingual, how does that person really learn effective ways for using bilingual books? And as a group, we brainstormed, and people had lots of suggestions. But that was a very particular session. And I would like to see the publishing community, the community of educators saying, we need to talk about this. If we're committed to these young people, whether they are speaking Arabic at home or Japanese at home, how are we going to honor those home languages? How are we going to incorporate them? And one of the ways, of course, is that teachers and librarians have to be willing to put themselves in difficult situations, immersing themselves in these cultures. And usually, they find that so enriching and are so grateful, but it takes going out of what we call our comfort zone sometimes.
So we're going to talk about using bilingual books, but I just want to personally follow up on, what Pat Mora just said there. I grew up in such a homogeneously white community, and there's nothing particularly there's nothing that special about me or winding up having done this work. Yes, I did learn how to speak Spanish, and that was an asset. But I'm not really different from anybody else. And what she's saying there about how enriching it is to go outside of the comfort zone and immerse yourself in another culture. So I really wasn't familiar with the Latino culture, or Latino cultures before I started doing this work. And absolutely, it's one of the best things that has ever happened in my life. Not only professionally, but personally. Just perspective changing in a way that I don't know that my personal life experience would have, I don't know if that would have happened. Yeah, it is, I already mentioned the nerves, at the beginning. But I am so grateful that to every single family that I have ever had the opportunity to meet, and the things that they've shared with me along that journey. I feel like that they did so much more for me than I did for them. So I hope that you all find that you can have those experiences as well. So bilingual books. You don't have to be bilingual to read bilingual books. I think that is one of the things that's kind of like a light bulb moment. Of course, of course I could be using bilingual books, but because it's so obvious, but sometimes we just kind of miss it. But you can absolutely be bringing bilingual books into English language story time and be, saying things like, today we're going to read Tito Puente Mambo King, Rey del Mambo by Monica Brown and Rafael Lopez. And this is a bilingual book. It is written in English and Spanish, and the words are together on the same page. And today we're going to be reading it in English, but how cool is it that this book is actually in 2 languages, and just be showcasing, be highlighting, be bringing those books off of the shelves and into the light, even if you're only reading the English language text in the book. You're not using the book wrong if you aren't reading it in both languages. That's totally fine to do. And same for just making sure that those bilingual books are on displays and book lists and all that other stuff that I already mentioned as well. And one thing that I think is important to acknowledge with bilingual books is thinking about how those books are cataloged and shelved and how that impacts access. So, books that are written in 2 languages, they're written that way to extend the reach, right? Like to extend or widen the audience of who can enjoy those books. But what I see happen a lot is that books that are written in 2 languages usually wind up being cataloged as foreign language books and then put in wherever the foreign language book area is in the collection. And all too often, that area is not a prominent area, right? It's not somewhere front and center. It's usually sort of like tucked in a, corner, back deep somewhere. And there's value in having, all of your Japanese books be together so that if families are looking for books in Japanese, there's one place for them to go, or, fill in the blank group. But with bilingual books, when we tuck them away with the foreign language books, how likely is it that the English speaking families who may also really, really enjoy these books are going to find them, right? If they're not in the collection that those families are used to browsing. And also too, sometimes our foreign language area it's hard to find, especially if you're newer to libraries, or just whatever, don't have the language skills to the English language skills, and the staff doesn't have the other language skill to help you find what you're looking for. So sometimes, even though our intention is to make it easier for these books to be checked out, what we're doing is we're actually making it harder for them to be checked out because less people are able to find them. And then what is the criteria that most libraries use when they go about weeding? It's circulation numbers, right? So that's definitely something to think about, because sometimes just where we're putting books, it like sets them up for failure in a way, because they can be out of our sight, so we sort of don't have them front and center to remember or to explore to use in our programs. They're not front and center for families who speak English, who only speak English to check out and use. And then they may not be easy for families who speak other languages necessarily to find too. So I'm not gonna say, there's a right way to do this, but I think it's a really important question to just consider and to ask, because these books can be enjoyed by so many people, even if they don't speak the language other than English that is included in the book. I am going to skip this book trailer, but it is on your handout, and I definitely recommend checking it out because it's really fun. All right, so blended books. This is what Tina was talking about. So looking or using those books that are mostly written in English, but then they have, some words or phrases from another language included within them. These books can be so great to use, but we really want to have a critical eye when assessing them for quality. So sometimes the way another language is used in these kinds of books is, it's great. It's like it enriches the text. It really flows. Kids and bilingual families like often speak doing code switching anyway. That was always one of my favorite things working at the last library where I worked, just especially with like the teenagers, just hearing them talk and the way that they just seamlessly flip back and forth and saying some things in one language and some things in another. And so these books can be really, really great. But sometimes they're not. So sometimes it's like kind of like a gimmick, or something that just is like, just kind of thrown um, in a way that isn't really high quality, but just kind of is like just kind of gimmicky. So my suggestion is really to prioritize the use of own voices books. So if you're using books that are blended in this way, choosing books that have been created by authors and or illustrators who are representative of that culture, are insiders of that culture, who speak that language, and that can help you to know that the way that the language is being used is of a high quality. And then again, those audio dictionaries or glossaries that are often in the back of books like this can be really helpful for pronunciation. Again, I'm going to skip this one too, this book trailer, just because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions and whatnot and to get through everything. But it's this book, Take Me Out to the Yakyu, is really lovely blending of English and Japanese through the way baseball is used or baseball is a very popular sport in both cultures, and so I definitely recommend checking it out on your own. All right, so bilingual books that are mostly in English, but that incorporate a little bit of another language. And then we also have translated books to talk about. And I would say that it's great to use translations, like in a bilingual story time, let's say, of your English language favorites. But to use them sparingly, and to make sure that you're not only going to, yay, here's the very hungry caterpillar in Spanish, and here's Kevin Hankey's in Mandarin or whatever, but that you're really looking for and prioritizing books that are written, that are own voices and that are written in by folks from the cultures that you're looking to include. So definitely great to use them, but really challenge yourself to make sure that they're not all that you're using. If you yourself are bilingual and there isn't a lot of bilingual books in your collection or translated books in your collection of in the language that you're looking for, it can be really tempting to just, have the English language book and sort of translate it yourself on the fly, right? Because you have the language skills to be able to do that. I want to encourage folks, like, you know, sometimes you just have to, sometimes you don't always have like ideal choices. So it's not wrong to do this, especially if this is what you have to do to serve the group that you're trying to serve. But the reason that I say to try to avoid it is that you want to hold your library system accountable for purchasing books that are, written in these other languages or that are, translated into these other languages, so that they are in your collection for families to be able to take home and use on their own. And if we're doing a lot of translating on the fly, then it's sort of like it doesn't make the case to the people who are spending money that money needs to be spent on these books that are written in other languages too. So that's kind of where that comes from. Translated books, you got to look for quality on that as well, just to, especially if you yourself aren't 100% sure, like, this translation of this book a good quality translation. So we'll talk about some really great review sources, and if you have other colleagues that you can ask questions to, then that's great as well. And then if you are using translated books, you'll probably start to see certain names show up a lot. So the names that I have listed here are the ones that I'm familiar with because these are really, really excellent translators of English language into Spanish language children's books. So I know if I'm picking up a book and it's been translated by Alma Flor Ala, like, it's going to be great. The translation's going to be great. And so, regardless of the language that you're using, keeping track of who those great translators are, and passing that information along to people who are purchasing as well, if you aren't the one who has that responsibility. And if you're doing English language, if you're only doing English language story time, another way to, incorporate another language that you don't speak is to bring in the translated books that you do have and put them on display, the same way that you would display any other books, for folks to check out and to use at home in those other languages if they do speak those other languages. Because, for example, in my family, my husband speaks and reads Japanese, so it would be, and I speak and read Spanish. So if we take our daughter to English language story time, right? And then, oh, awesome, they have this book in Japanese. We can take it home and read it in Japanese and in English too. You know, it's just increasing discoverability because you don't always know what the language skills are of the folks who are coming to your story times. All right, so it's not just books that we use in story time, right? And so another way to um, structure, you know, another resource to use in bilingual story time or also in your English language story times to be inclusive are songs and rhymes. And so I kind of break these down in traditional and contemporary. So traditional rhymes, you know, rhymes that people grow up saying or hearing from their families or in school or wherever, that those are really powerful tools because they have this cultural connection, right? And they also that cultural memory um, is really important. Like when you touch on that, it helps to model like, oh yeah, like these are great things that we can continue to use at home as well, which again is always part of what we're hoping to accomplish with Storytime. It's really fun. If you have, working in English and Spanish, right? Like I would have families, Spanish speaking families who were from different countries in story time. And it's always so fun. Like if you're singing something, a traditional song, you know, that is widely known, say throughout the Spanish speaking world, but it's a little bit different in Mexico and a little bit different in Peru and, you know, and like, it's a cool thing to, you know, kind of stimulate that conversation among families as well. Um, and traditional rhymes and songs are relatively easy to find. Also, I find that it's easier to find traditional rhymes and songs in other languages, especially these days with everything that's available on YouTube, than it is to find like Lori Berkner in Chinese or, you know, something like that. Um, there are resources out there that will give you translations of traditional rhymes and songs, and so that can go in both directions. So traditional English language rhymes and songs translated to another language and vice versa. But you want to be careful with those. I've found even in Spanish, even some of the resources that are really widely recommended, sometimes there's more emphasis when like literal words than in the maintaining of the rhythm and of the rhyme. So, you know, if you're bilingual yourself and you're reading a translation of a song or a rhyme and it's like, no, then just don't feel any pressure to scrap it. There's so much great stuff out there. Um, and so if something just doesn't seem like it's flowing or working, you know, then build off of it and fix it if you can. You know, just because it's in a book doesn't mean that you have to use those exact words. Contemporary children's musicians that are doing uh, kids music in other languages, like the song that we saw from Elena Moon Park earlier. When you find them, oh my gosh, they can be just so much fun. And finding those musicians is such a great source of like movement songs, action songs, you know, the kinds of things that you want to do to get up and get wiggling in between books. It would be awesome to create playlists that you could share with families on social media of those excuse me, of those new and traditional songs being created by contemporary children's musicians. And if you don't speak the language or aren't using those songs actually in your story time, you still can be inclusive again by playing them and talking about them and pointing them out as families are arriving or during those periods of play and socialization. So I've got to show you guys, we won't watch the whole thing, but I've got to show you an example of one of my favorites. So Lucky Diaz and the Family Jam Band, great example of contemporary Latino children's music. And so they've got loads of original songs in English. They've got loads of original songs in Spanish. They've got bilingual stuff. And this song that you're gonna see a little bit is their version. It's called Piñata Attack, and it it's like a spin on this traditional children's song in Spanish called Dale, 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 which is what you would sing before you're hitting a piñata, so hence Piñata Attack. But you'll hear that it's just got a very unique and cool vibe.
Dale, 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 no pierdes el tino, porque si lo pierdes, pierdes el camino. Y ahora dices una, think I see you cry. It's a piñata attack. Pero la piñata la quiero romper.
I love that song so much. It's just that kind of like surf vibe that's going on in it. Like it's the kind of children's music that doesn't like, you know, kill adult brains. You know what I mean? Because let's be honest, not all of some of it is some children's music is like whew. So I wanted to be sure to share that one with you guys. All right, let's talk about cultural authenticity. Things to look for, things to avoid when choosing the materials that we share. So it's important to make sure that the books that we're using aren't propagating stereotypes or appropriating aspects of a culture to make it fit into the more dominant culture, you know. So the review sites that I'm going to show you guys are really going to be helpful tools because maybe you don't always know, you know, so we'll look at that. But we do want to be careful and make sure that, you know, that we're choosing books that have an authentic and positive portrayal of other cultures. And if, you know, if you use a book and then later you read a review or hear someone at a conference or even are approached by somebody, you know, a fellow staff member or someone in the community, and you learn like that wasn't the best book choice, try to relax into that. No one likes to get called out, and it can feel really embarrassing, right? But really, that is a gift. That is a gift. So yeah, that, I mean, it's happened to me before, and it doesn't feel great, but wow, like how powerful, you know, to learn not just this one isn't great, but here's why. Because then you can avoid making those mistakes in the future. So that's a gift. There's a white paper on using multicultural children's literature that was put out by ALSC that is included on your resources handout. that talks about avoiding a tourist approach to multicultural programming, and it's really worth taking a look at that. So, I mean, Rudine Sims Bishop in the video we already saw kind of alluded to this too. You know, we don't want to pull these multicultural books out, you know, because it's a heritage month or because there's a holiday coming up. We really want to embed and integrate them all the time. And make sure that the books that we're choosing don't just focus on the 5 Fs, you know, food, festivals, folklore, fashion, and famous people. Not bad or wrong to use books that talk about those things, right? But, you know, people are, there's so much to people's lives, no matter what culture you come from, outside of just your holidays and your folk tales and the foods that you eat, right? Um, we really want to look for books that center um, multicultural characters, you know, and show just like a full range of life, you know, show um, you know, a Latino child losing a tooth in The Tooth Fairy and Raton Perez by Renee Colato Lainez. I might have gotten the title slightly wrong on that, but um, or, you know, that show like in My Footprints, that girl of Vietnamese heritage who also has 2 moms, right? So um, just really looking for books that center the just the humanity of other cultures, and not only focusing on these sort of like um, touristy kind of aspects. And we definitely want to, you know, kind of stray away from the exoticism too. And I will say, like, I'm going to show you guys some sample story times in a second. And, you know, at this point for English and Spanish, you know, there's so much great stuff to choose from, to be able to really represent diversity of Latino experiences through the books that we choose. Not enough, but way better than it was 15 years ago, for sure. And way better than it is for other cultures and other languages today. So, you know, when I was looking for materials for Mandarin English story time, goodness, there's like 1,000 books about Chinese New Year. But I just want, like, I want to see Chinese characters. I want books that are written by Chinese authors and illustrated by Chinese illustrators, you know, and um, that center um, a Chinese family in a story about anything, a story about anything at all, not just about Chinese New Year, you know. And so it is harder for some groups, but that's also part of why we have to really seek out these books and use them, so that there will be more of a demand for them in the market. Okay, so we're gonna watch a little bit of a video here. I'm sure you all recognize this character, and I am gonna pull this up so I can actually, I don't know what is going on with Zoom on my end, Kim, so I might need you to help me keep an eye on the chat here. Oh, here we go. I can pull it up
No
now.
problem.
So I just want to give a quick trigger warning. At isn't sorry, real quick. Did I just turn my video off?
Yeah, you did. So we can see the
Okay,
screen.
there we
you
go.
go. You're back.
Now I'm back. Yeah, the Zoom on my end is acting super weird today. All right. So we'll just put this over here. Okay. We're just gonna watch a little bit of this book trailer. for one of the Skippy John Jones books, and it's the author and illustrator, Judy Schachner, reading this book, so you hear her actual voice. And as we're thinking about cultural authenticity, I would like to hear from the group, what stands out to you as potentially problematic in anything that you might see. And just trigger warning, this could be offensive to some folks. So if you would prefer not to, if you already know where we're going and you'd prefer not to watch this, then, that's cool.
Skippy John Jones was a real high-wire Henry, and that made his mama as worried as a worm in a wading pool. "Oh, my fleas," wailed Mama Junebug Jones. "Come down from that wire before you break all your bones."
He can't hear you,
sang his sisters, Jujubee, Jezebel, and Jilly Boo.
'cause Skippy's up in Squirrely World.
Oh, my name is Skipito Fresquito, and I'm one handsome daredevilito. I'm physically fit, every part, every bit, just right for a circus puchito.
So what do you think? Hear anything? See anything?
We've got a few things coming in the chat, Katie. Are you able to see those, or do you want me to read them
I am not
for you?
able.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you can help me.
Yep, not a problem. So Jessica Phillips said stereotypes with the musical number at the end, a la cucaracha, right? And Estefania said the use of accents was weird to hear, which I personally agree with, and I wonder where that author's from, because it's the, yeah, I have my own thoughts. Millbury Library said couldn't be much further from authentic, not real Spanish. Jennifer, pardon me, Jennifer, for possibly getting this wrong. Jennifer Stuziero said appropriation and stereotyping. Kathy Potter said gender stereotypes.
Awesome. So you guys are hitting on some really, really great stuff. I hadn't thought about the gender aspect of that. So that, thank you for that's illuminating for me as well. But yeah, I mean, so these books are so popular. Name a library you could go into in the United States and not find Skippy John Jones, Every bookstore, you've got all the branded material, it's everywhere. And if you've used Skippy John Jones in story time, this is an opportunity to just look at it through another lens that maybe you hadn't seen it through before. But yeah, this book that some people can see as playful pretending, to others is a gross appropriation, and very offensive misuse of Spanish language and aspects of Latino culture. So I'm glad that you all were able to pick up on those things. And if this is anybody's favorite, it's not always it's not comfortable, to hear those things. And so just sitting with it, and having that, building that skill set of having that kind of critical way to evaluate some of the materials that we use, because just because something is a bestseller doesn't always mean that it's great, and that would definitely be a not good sort of approach to blending two languages in one book.
And Katie, we have a comment from Morgan W. that I want to read. And Morgan said that they removed them from their collection this summer just for the reasons that we're talking about here.
Wow. Wow, that's a really bold bold step. So, you know, that there's so many there's so many ways that you could go on that conversation, it will go places that we don't have time to go to today, but it sounds like you guys are really assessing your collection from voices outside of the dominant culture. And so I definitely think that that's awesome that you guys are looking at material, you know, from other lenses. So how do you know if something is good or not? All of these resources are on your handout. And I really, really encourage you to check out and explore these. There's others as well, but these are three of my favorites just because of how easy they are to use. So We Need Diverse Books is a movement that people are probably familiar with, and they have a tool that you can use called Our Story, and it is awesome. I used it for a lot of, I used it a lot in looking for materials for the sample story times that we have coming up. But basically, it kind of does like a little 5-question quiz that you can walk through. You know, what age are you looking for? What kind of story are you looking for? Realistic, fairy tales, whatever. What kind of diversity are you looking for? Gender diversity, sexual orientation, racial or ethnic, socioeconomic, and you can just choose from this, and then it's going to give you a list of books that fit those criteria that they recommend. So awesome tool. Kirkus Reviews is my favorite review site, because I used to write for Kirkus, and I know firsthand how much effort they have put into building a really diverse cadre of reviewers so that folks can be noticing. You know, they have people who can see the nuances from the inside, to be able to you know, clearly identify the quality of a book. And they also, for I think like at least the last 5 years, explicitly name race in all of their reviews. So it's not that it's not this assumed default of whiteness. You know, race is and skin tone and whatnot is named in all of their reviews. There's also a tool called Diverse Book Finder that's pretty great. One of the reasons that I like it is that you can put in a theme. So say I'm looking for books on spring, and so I can put in spring as my theme and then get a list of a bunch of diverse books. Now, there's the books haven't necessarily been vetted for quality. It's just whether or not there are diverse characters in those books, or that they've been written by diverse authors. So if something shows up on the Diverse Book Finder, I'm still going to go out and check reviews of it or look at it, you know, myself, to be able to decide whether or not if it's good. But it's a really great starting point. So really recommend playing around with these resources and with these tools to help you find the books that you're looking for to be inclusive of other cultures and other languages in your story time. All right, so the last chunk of today is I'm going to walk you guys through some sample story times so that I can talk a little bit about what bilingual story time might look like for babies, toddlers, preschoolers, and in a mixed age kind of family setting. You have this material. I put everything in a handout for you. Songs are and resources that I used to build these story times are linked to make it really easy to find them. So we won't go through every single bit and piece, but just to kind of show in action, what bilingual story time might look like for these different age groups. So with babies, this is really about fostering adult-child interaction, right? Like that's what it is about, and around literacy, and around those early literacy practices, and communicating that message of that it is never too early to read to your baby, and you can't ever talk enough with your baby, and that's how they learn and all those kinds of things. So these programs are often going to be brief with lots and lots of rhymes and songs. You're probably going to repeat material, from week to week. So maybe you have, a theme and, songs and rhymes that you're using on that theme for, a month or 6 weeks or 2 months, because that repetition is really important. That's how not only that the babies learn, but also the parents learn those songs and rhymes too. And then it creates that routine. And if you are going to use books, probably only going to read one story and keep them simple, and use books that touch on first concepts, and especially board books. And when it comes to board books, I wanted to share, because I know of these books from doing the work in English and Spanish, and that 87% of you are looking to do programs in English and Spanish as well. There are 4 really awesome board book series that I really recommend. Little Libros, Canticos, Arte Kids, and the Wild series. The first 3 are, well, at least the first 2 are insiders. Arte Kids is like a collaboration with a art museum and some authors. And then the Wild series isn't the own voice. Like they're bilingual, but they aren't written by a or Latina author or illustrator. However, the late Teresa Malauer, who was a colleague that I got to work on some really cool projects with, and who is an amazing translator, is the translator of this book series. And so I recommend those for that reason. So in a baby story time that's bilingual, and this one happens to be bilingual in English and Spanish, maybe you're going to open with an opening song that's in English and Spanish, and then maybe do a finger play that is known, like a traditional finger play that in English that also has a really good translation in Spanish. So open, shut them, abren las, cierren las, and then maybe do a traditional rhyme like tortillitas, or little tortillas, that's well known in the Spanish speaking world. And you can do it in Spanish and English, and keep kind of going like that. And then, have those opportunities for parent and child interaction with board books, with balls, with bubbles, while you play music, in Spanish or in English, or that's bilingual. So this would be kind of how I would structure a bilingual baby story time. And then I would probably keep all of this the same, except for maybe switching out the book, and keeping it a short, brief, bilingual, um, preferably own voices book, but keep everything else in it the same for at least a month, so that that repetition is built in. And if you are looking for resources for um, bilingual baby story time and English and Spanish specifically, a lot of folks are familiar with Mother Goose on the Loose, developed by Betsy Diamont Cohen, and she does have a bilingual version of that available as well. So toddlers, they're learning how to move their bodies around in space, right? Like that's really what it's all about at that age. It's just like, what can my body do? So you're still going to want to have a lot of songs and rhymes and opportunities for them to kind of practice listening to directions and following directions, but also sort of being just curious about what they can do. And again, you want to keep books short and don't use too many of them. Like I would probably only use like 2 books in a toddler story time, and especially if it's bilingual, and then really focusing on first concepts like counting, colors, shapes, all that kind of stuff. And this is my little girl and my husband, actually. I've shared bits of my personal story with you guys, including, our things about our family. So I thought I would give you a little picture there. She's bigger now. That was maybe about a year and a half ago when that picture was taken. So definitely more of a preschooler than a toddler these days. So this is a bilingual story time that I came up with in English and Mandarin. And this was such a fun challenge because I've never done this before. I've never built a story time in English and Mandarin before. So I found from Jay Brary a piggyback song that could be sort of a intro song, and clap your hands and say ni hao, clap your hands and say ni hao. So it's mostly in English, right? But you're kind of bringing in that hello. But if you've got the language skills, right, like you could definitely build on that and bring more of the language into it. The own voices, I have a book that I picked for this round is a mooncake. That is an example of that blended style that we were talking about earlier, where it's mostly in English, but there are some Chinese words, as well as so many references to various aspects of Chinese culture as well. Then I would move on and do some traditional rhymes and songs, and and then close it out. So yeah, definitely had to look for some resources when planning this one, and all of this stuff is listed on your handout. But really, the big thing that you can see here is that that I'm keeping the books short, right, and keeping in some of the rhymes and songs, but they might start to be a little bit more kind of complex. And I do want to show you guys this video. This is a demonstration of a traditional rhyme called Two Tigers, and I don't know how to say it in Mandarin, but the woman who, this is from the Embracing Diversity Project, and she's going to demo it for us and also talk about it and what she says about how this rhyme is known, is why, you know, I put it into the Storytime plan.
The other one is Two Tigers. When I was asked to sing any song, this one just came out from my mind right away because it's so popular since I was a little child. And I do believe lots of Chinese, they understand, they know this Two Little Tigers song as well. 两只老虎，两只老虎，跑得快，跑得快。一只没有耳朵，一只没有尾巴，真奇怪，真奇怪。I do know some cultures, like Canadian cultures, they parents sing a lot of songs, even lullabies to their little kids. That's how they grew up. But my parents didn't. And most of the songs I know from when I was little, when I attended elementary school and when I went to choir, that's how I learned those songs. Mm-hmm.
So preschool, we can start to bring in longer books, nonfiction, doing some dialogic reading, lots of humor at this age, right? Anything that isn't like where it's supposed to be or used how it's supposed to be is hilarious for preschoolers. I really love this age so much. Still lots of singing and movement as well. And then starting to bring out some of those kind of process-based things that adults and children can do together, can be really fun as well. So I looked for materials to create a inclusive story time of Arabic speaking cultures, and I have to say this was harder. There's so many stories that are like the struggle and the refugee story, and just it's not that those stories aren't important, but there I found that it was a lot harder to find books that just showed Arabic speaking families or families from countries where Arabic is spoken, in everyday life. And I was so grateful on Flipgrid. I think Carrie, there's this book, Layla in Saffron, that I had not come across. And I would totally put it into this storytime plan. It was just like such a cool story about a little girl who maybe doesn't feel so great about herself, and she's from a Pakistani family, and how in cooking, I think with her grandmother, she utilizes her 5 senses to connect with aspects of her culture. And I mean, for me, I'm really big on putting mindfulness into any story time. Like, it doesn't have to be a yoga story time. Mindfulness can be so healing and such a buffer against trauma. And mindfulness is all about using the senses to connect with the present moment when we teach it to young kids. And so I will definitely be checking that book out. I will probably add it to my story, songs, and stretches repertoire. So thank you so much for putting it on Flipgrid. So this one is inclusive, intentionally inclusive, but not fully bilingual. And you can see that there are some traditional songs and rhymes. And then the books are own voices books. So they are using more of that blended style. So there are some words in Arabic, but it's more about the positive presentation and centering of kids from these cultures than about fully bilingual, and how I built this one specifically. And then for multi-age story time, so um, one of the things that sometimes people feel as a challenge with bilingual story time, especially with bilingual story time in English and Spanish, is that the whole family comes together. And yeah, I mean, like if you're programming, you know, and there's like babies through 9-year-olds in the room, that is challenging. But what a wonderful problem. Oh my gosh, what a wonderful problem that the whole family is there and they want to interact, you know, and together around literacy, and so it just takes a little bit of thinking about like, well, how would I set this up? And really, it's all about interaction. So I love looking for games, action songs, you know, that you get the parents up and doing with the kids, and having the older kids sort of be the helpers to the younger kids in various activities. Having stories, whether they're books or storytelling, where there's like key phrases or words that are repeated so you can get people kind of saying along. And family story time is really a great place to embrace those traditional rhymes and songs as well, because, you know, parents are going to know them, and probably the older kids are going to know them. And when you touch on something that people already recognize, you know, you really can bring in that participation. Um, and so the program plan that I have to share, um, this kind of got around, this was interesting. So I had been doing bilingual story time for a while, and my kids are kind of aging out. And then, uh, like it was like the numbers were dropping. It was like, what's going on, you know? And I was talking to one of my colleagues about this. His name was Raul. And you know, he gave me such wonderful insight. Um, you know, it was like families here, you know, um, hora de cuentos bilingües or whatever, like the translation of bilingual story time, and they they think that that their kid is that it's gonna be like school, and their kid is gonna have to hold still, you know. We hear story time, and you know, for a lot of us it means something, because there's a cultural touchstone, you know. I went to story time as a kid. I know what story time is, but you can't assume that the word story time means this anything to anybody else, you know. It might not. And I didn't realize that that the just the name was something that was creating a barrier, you know, because it felt like, oh, you know, I'm going to be so embarrassed because my kid's going to go in there and they're going to want to run around or blah 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 blah. So I did a series of using traditional rhymes as like the program name and theme. And so one of them was arroz con leche, which is a traditional Spanish language children's song. And it's also a dessert, rice pudding. And so, I mean, there was so much appeal in that, and so many families came, and it was super interactive. We read these books about rice pudding, and of course sang arroz con leche, a version of it, and but then we also like did all this interactive play of like making arroz con leche with you know, with like real ingredients. And you could do that in so many ways. You could like act out a recipe, or you could have process stations, right, where you can measure and pour. And there's just so many different ways that you could approach that. And it really like helped to change the understanding of story time as being something that is where kids are expected to be kids, and there will be something for, you know, babies through older kids, especially with how you set up the like the stations for play. And then of course we had a tasting of actual arroz con leche as well. And if I were to do that program again, you know, I would absolutely use that as a mindful moment, just this opportunity to really mindfully notice and taste the food before gobbling it down and working that in. So I'm gonna skip this song, but I do want to point out, if you are looking for songs and Spanish language children's songs, the same board book series, Canticos, that I mentioned before, they also have lots of songs, and they've worked with Nick Jr. and have created all these really cool videos, and have kind of updated some of the traditional songs. And I really like this one because it takes arroz con leche, this traditional song, and kind of updates it a little bit to be less about marriage, for those of you who recognize the rhyme, and kind of turns it into a movement song, which, you know, is great because then we can get up and be moving our bodies around too. So that's there's a link to that on your handout. So I want to wrap it up. You know, clearly I could probably talk another hour on this topic, but I want to make sure to leave time for questions and discussion. Just kind of recapping some of our best practices, regardless of whether you are going to do a monolingual story time in another language, or an English language story time that's intentionally inclusive of another language or other cultures, or a fully bilingual program on your own or with a partner. We really want to make sure that we are seeking out and using those own voices books, and prioritizing them over just relying on translations of books that we are already familiar with in English. We can make sure that those bilingual and own voices, diverse books are everywhere, right? And that is something that we can start to audit and reflect on and update tomorrow by looking at book lists, displays, what we're using in our programs, all of that. Definitely check out those useful review sites to evaluate cultural authenticity. It's not just books, but music too. So both the traditional songs and rhymes and those really great contemporary children's musicians when you find them. You know, where you can, involve the community that you're trying to target with your program too. Remember everything we talked about in the first session about outreach, you know, so those folks might be able to give you some guidance. Kind of community leaders maybe pop in, people who are trusted and known in the community to be guest readers, and do the outreach visits so that you're taking these programs outside of the library. And then make sure to share early literacy and school readiness information in other languages as well. And there are resources on your handout that will guide you to where you can find some of that great stuff that some of it can be videos, some of it might be printables. So even if you don't speak a language other than English, you can still be sharing that early literacy information. So
We've got a few questions too,
good.
Katie. So
All right.
this timing is great. Okay, so I'm going to slide back here in the chat. We had a question from one person who said that everything that you talked about was great, but they are concerned that some of this won't translate to online story times during the after times of COVID. Any thoughts on ways to adapt and or challenges to anticipate for doing online story times? And before I let you answer that, Katie, I did just want to acknowledge that we had a response to that from Jessica, who said maybe avoid some of the books and focus on songs and action rhymes that groups like Jayberry share. And I posted, and someone else posted farther down here, and links to the SLJ Google sheet where they are keeping updated publisher permissions. And I just went and glanced at that a little while you were talking, and some of those extend to December 31st of this year. So there are some publishers who are allowing folks to use their picture books in online story times. Some just ask that you let them know in advance, which means we have to plan out. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. But did you want to speak to any thoughts on doing these story time outlines in the times of COVID?
Yeah, sure. So I guess some of it's going to depend on your approach and what your skill set is. And so let's say that you are bilingual. Absolutely, you can still use use songs, use rhymes, storytelling, and this can apply whether you're bilingual or not. Use flannel boards, right? So, you can, on my YouTube page, there's a playlist of songs and rhymes and stories that are demonstrated. Some are fully bilingual, and some of them are mostly in English and then incorporate some Spanish words and phrases. So one of them is a pretty well-known Cuban folktale, the Bossy Gallito, the Bossy Little Rooster. And so you could have a flannel board, right, and tell a story and just choose some key words to incorporate in another language. um, you you yeah so if the issue is finding the exact books, I think that there are definitely workarounds to that if you're wanting to include another language in your program. If you're wanting to make sure there's other cultural representation, I would look to the local community too and see if somebody wants to be like a guest star in one of your virtual story times, so that maybe, they can sing a song or tell a story with you. And so, yeah, maybe you aren't able to necessarily use an Own Voices book, but you can still make some connections with the local community, to bring those people into the fold and to just to increase who sees themselves and who is seen in the virtual programming. So it might take a little creativity, but and sure, not everything's going to translate, but just because not everything will translate to the days of COVID doesn't mean that you can't pick and choose some bits and pieces that will.
And also planning for longevity, because I'm not even going to say with luck, because I'm going to put positivity out into the universe, but this has to end at some point. And our babies are going to be coming back to the library at some point. So plan for longevity for the days when we do have kids sitting in front of us on carpet squares, or more accurately, like running around and climbing on chairs. Who are we kidding? No one sits on the carpet squares but the parents. So we're planning for that as well. I also am going to slide back, Katie, to a message that I got that on the handout that you prepared for us. We don't quite have all of the book trailers. There is one that I saw on there, but some of the other book trailers, and I was writing down some titles myself to compile and put together on our LibGuides page, but maybe those are somewhere too. That can be looked at later.
At the very top of the handout that I created, it should say videos used in this session.
We
And
have reaching out to Latino families, welcoming Latino families at the library.
that's the last
video.
one. That's the last handout. There's a new handout.
Ah, so this is me. I think I'm not sharing with you all the new handout. So I will do that in an email, and also I will dig for it in the chat and do that.
Actually, at this point, I can probably stop my screen share. Okay, so I just stopped my screen share, and so this should make it easier now for me to be able to
see all that one was farther back.
Out of here. I'm going to grab this and grab the resources link and put it in. Is there another question while I am doing that?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
We had a question, and this might be in your YouTube page. I'm going to let you speak to it. Kathy asked, do you have more recesses for more culturally authentic children's music?
Yeah, so so I am familiar mostly with Latino children's music and rhymes and things. So in Once Upon a Cuento, I can't get my Zoom to come back up now. I'm so sorry. I don't know what is going on with this thing.
We can see you too, and I know you emailed it to me, so I'm gonna dig.
Okay, yeah. So I'll let you share that because it's like now I can't even like get into Zoom at all. Okay, so Once Upon a Cuento has tons and tons and tons of stuff if you are looking for English and Spanish. And I'm not trying to sell you my book, borrow it from the library, that's totally fine. I definitely suggest the story blocks from Colorado Libraries for Early Literacy and Embracing Diversity from the Burnaby Public Library. Those are really great places to get started for finding materials and books and songs and whatnot in other languages and from other cultures, not books, songs and rhymes. And then King County Library System, they had, this may not have made it to the handout, but I think they still have the material available on their YouTube page. They had a wiki for a while called Tell Me a Story. Maybe it did make it to the handout. But they also have a lot of songs and rhymes demonstrated by their library staff in other languages too. And so many libraries, like on YouTube, you can find just so many things. So you might have to do a little bit of digging. Those 3 places can definitely help you get started. And in the sample story times that I pulled together for today, I shared with you all as much, I shared with you all what I was able to find, but you may have to talk to some of those folks that you're making connections with as you're doing your outreach and building partnerships in the community to find some more of those materials. I mean, I certainly haven't covered all ground that there is to be covered, but hopefully the things that you got today will point you in the right direction, both for traditional and for some of the contemporary children's musicians as well.
Thank you. And I did post your current resource links. I was sharing the wrong ones in the chat. I will email those out to everybody as well, so you'll have them all over the place. So we have another question. Do you have resources for bilingual books in Hindi? I've used Language Lizard, but their selection is limited.
Their selection is limited, and Language Lizard, I have that on the resources page too, and it's it's frustrating because it's mostly translations, right? And but things are getting better. I would say use the R Story.
We need diverse books.
Yes, from We Need Diverse Books, that tool that they've created. I'm looking down here. There are also, in the handout that I prepared for you guys, there are several book publishers and distributors that I put up there. I think it's Tulika Books, the last one. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's that one that that really focuses on books that include languages or are written by or are bilingual in multiple languages that are spoken in India, because it's not just Hindi, there are other languages too. So I might be wrong about that, but I would say start with the materials that are already on the handout, and I feel pretty confident that at least one of them on there is going to point you in the right direction. And then also connecting as well with the Asian and Pacific Islander Librarians Association, which includes India and again the R Story tool from We Need Diverse Books. Those should all start to point you in the right direction.
Thank you. And I don't see any more questions. So I know some of you have to sort of skedaddle, but for my librarians who are here with me in Connecticut, I want to remind you about our literacy grants. One of those 7 literacies is early literacy. I checked with our LSTA coordinator while we were here. You absolutely can apply for a literacy grant if you really want to go whole hog with multilingual story times, which might include being able to compensate, because Katie did mention being able to pay for folks that you are bringing in, or if you're able to bring someone in whose job this is, so they get compensation from their job. Please keep that in mind. The deadline isn't even until 2021, so there's a ton of time to sit on that, think about that, and then reach out to us here at DLD. And by us, I mean not me, I mean Chris Gavro, who is our LSTA coordinator. I'm putting her email in the chat, and these are for my folks here in Connecticut. Sometimes money is difficult. If your book budgets are tight, COVID tightened things more, apply for these grants and get some extra cash so that you can do your very best for these kids in our community. So thank you, everybody. I will email out all of these resources again, including our survey. Please answer our survey. Please answer our survey. And thank you guys for your time, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody. If you see me in person at a conference or something somewhere, please do say hi. I always love that when I get to connect with people face to face, and I hope this is useful. So thanks for having me, Kim.
Absolutely.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Kathy.